Hey guys, Cameron here with CJR Performance, and today we're going to be installing the oversized throttle body setup on your CRF110. There's a lot of little small details to go over with this, so really watch it from start to finish, as we are going to do a TPS reset at the end for the throttle position sensor, because anytime you remove that sensor, you got to reset that piece. So let's dive in and show you how easy this is. So we're going to start off by removing the plastics on this bike. 8mm in the front, 8mm in the back on the right side, as well as a black push pin in the front. You have that same black push pin on the left side with an 8mm in the front and then two 8mm on the back. Seat will come right off after you go ahead and get those back bolts out. Your ECU is located right underneath the seat. Your battery is located behind the left side cover. We do want to go ahead and disconnect that battery as well anytime you're doing electrical changes on this bike, so make that a habit. Let's go ahead and strip it down and dive into throttle body setup. Coming around to the left side of the bike, we're going to go ahead and take the airbox off, at least from the left side, and then we'll get around to the right side as there are a couple more bolts. 10mm in the front. There are going to be a couple of these little plastic tabs on the airbox, one on the left side, one in the middle. Go ahead and use some needle nose pliers to disconnect those. It's going to be your crankcase breather hose here. So if you do disconnect this, say you're running a pod filter or a different intake, just make sure you put some sort of a filter or breather cap. Keep it up high. You just don't want that thing to pack with mud, dirt, debris, anything like that. From here, screwdriver, we're going to go ahead and remove the clamp on the back side of the tube there. And let's go ahead and disconnect these two sensors on the throttle body. We're going to go over all the sensors here shortly once everything's laid out. And that's going to be everything on the left side. Coming around to the right side of the bike, we're going to have three 10mm. We do have to take the ignition coil off, as there is another mounting bolt on the back side. Phillips to take the cover off for the throttle cables. From here, we're going to go ahead and disconnect the intake air temp sensor. It's going to be located on the back of the airbox. So if you do forget to plug this in, you're going to get a check engine light after everything's said and done. This is going to be your injector. And the one in front of that's going to be your map sensor. Manifold pressure sensor. And let's go ahead and pull this box off. Next, we'll go ahead and pop the throttle cables off. Got 10mm on the bottom of each. $10mm on either side for the throttle body and the intake manifold assembly. We're going to save the fuel line for last, as there's kind of a couple little bits on that. Alright, and the trick on the fuel line, you can go ahead and rotate that around. I'm going to use a flathead to pop that tab up. And off. Just make sure you set that aside, we will need that later. Needle nose pliers to separate the two tabs in the middle. And at the same time, go ahead and push up. Oops, only got one of them. That'll slide right off. So those two little tabs can give you some trouble if they start to bend over as well. From here, we'll go ahead and break down the throttle body assembly setup and what goes where on your new one. Now that we have the throttle body off, we'll go ahead for disassembly. Really, you can start anywhere, just get everything taken off. We'll go ahead and show you kind of our procedure. We will be using the stock mount for the cables. Take that off and install it onto our new setup. Next, you're going to need a 25 Torx. The sensor here with the 2 Torx, that's the one with the gray connector plug. This is going to be your fast idle solenoid. So when you take this out, just be careful because this little diaphragm and spring, they can fall out like so. If it does fall out, just remember it goes back in like such. Spring in that direction, slot it back in, and then inward into the throttle body. So with the pod filters, you can go ahead and continue to run it downward. However, if you're running a stock airbox, we're going to flip this around, and you'll see here why just in a little bit. This sensor here is going to be your TPS sensor. So they're usually wedged on pretty tight, so if you can, that's about the easiest way. You slot a screwdriver in, just give it a little twist. Make sure the O-ring stays in there. Let's put that on our new setup. And keep in mind it is slotted, so whenever you put it on there, you do want to kind of look it back and forth. Just make sure it does slide into that slot evenly. Next we have our idle screw. So this screw here controls the amount of air that passes by the butterfly while it's closed. So if there's no air coming through at all, obviously the engine will stall. So there's a little passage there on the bottom. If you bring this screw outward, it's going to allow more air. So you can use this to help control the idle. The other part you'll use to control the idle is this here. And generally it'll be just barely resting on the plate. If you have done all your adjustments out of the air or the idle screw here, then any additional adjustments will be made here, and then you'll have to readjust it back with the idle screw. So you get a high idle, low idle, stuff like that. That's going to be the procedure for you. Now that this is out, we'll swap it over to the new setup, which is located on the side right next to the TPS sensor. This is going to go all the way in, and then we're going to back it out 2 full turns. And that's pretty much like a base setting. I've seen them as much as some bikes like them all the way in. I've seen them at a turn, turn and a half. Seen them as far out as 3 turns. So it is kind of a combination between, like I said, the little plate on the bottom along with this. But 2 turns to start. There's a half, there's 1, half, and 2. When you make your adjustments, generally 1/4 to an 1/8 turn at a time for your finer adjustments, and a 1/2 turn at a time for your bigger adjustments. Just make sure the bike's warmed up too. Next, we're going to go ahead and pull the injector and the map sensor off. Map sensor, obviously very easy, 110 mil. And we will not be using this bracket here either. So after that, go ahead and grab a 3 screwdriver, number 3 screwdriver. or actually, so I've already swapped the clamps on here, but the easiest way to do it, just grab a set of pliers, spread them apart, and then obviously put them back onto the new one, clamp it on once it's on the map sensor. I do recommend going ahead and installing this first. Go ahead and put that on the new manifold. And for those of you guys who have not seen it, that's stock versus the oversized there. So it's like breathing through a straw versus a 1-inch tube. Let's see next. Disassemble the throttle body. And the injector adapter is last, since you can't get to that 10 millimeter until that throttle body's off. So from here, we are going to save one of these bolts, as it is going to go through the mounting plate, and the other one's going to be our injector adapter holder for the new adapter. Make sure you get your O-ring. You don't want an air leak. Slide that back on. Go ahead and pull the injector off, another O-ring on the top, and then take off the red spacer. We will not be using that. And set your injector adapter aside. We will not be using that either. If you're running a pod filter or an aftermarket intake setup, you'll want this injector adapter with the 45-degree bend. If you're running the stock airbox, you're going to need the one with the 90. Only difference with the two, as we ordered, I would say 30 different injector adapters here, and really the only difference is going to be with this one you're going to run 2 bolts, with this one you're only going to run 1 bolt through the backside. So we're going to show you the stock airbox one, since this bike does have a stock airbox. Clip into place, slide into position, and 1 bolt to the back. And just make sure everything sizes up, looks good. Next, we'll do our throttle body assembly. Like I said, we're going to leave that other 10 millimeter right here, and that is going to go through the map sensor. Oops. Do the map sensor first, and then into our throttle body. And just make sure you go ahead and rotate it where it is facing just backwards, so it's going to be underneath, just like so. $8 millimeter through the top. And from there, you're all set, ready for install. Now go ahead and reinstall this entire assembly back on the bike just as you took it off. Cables, intake, sensors, and I will show you guys just what to do with this the sensor here. And as you can see, if it was flipped around, it's going to be right in line with the fuel line. However, if you're running this setup, it is going to rub the stock airbox really bad, so it kind of puts pressure on the fuel line. Not something we want. I do want to show you the order of events with the wire harness, and that way you guys don't get any of the connectors mixed up. A few of these connectors, as you can see, the TPS and the map are the same. The fast idle solenoid is the same as the intake temp sensor, which is also the same as the injector. So out of those 5, we're going to work our way down. Right off the first part of the loom, the gray one is going to be our fast idle solenoid. That's going to be this upper plug. The next one down is our TPS, which is the second plug. From there we have our map sensor, third plug. The fourth plug is going to be our injector, And the fifth plug is our air intake temp sensor on the airbox. Aside from that, moving over to the fuel line, you will need to put that little yellow clip back in, and then you'll be able to slot that right back into place. As far as the sensor here that we were talking about earlier, what we're going to do, there's one of two things. We are working on an extension harness, and so it'll be basically a 3-inch connector that'll allow you to run it without modifying the harness, or you can go ahead and undo some of the electrical tape here, which will give you quite a bit more room, and you can go ahead and plug it into place. So the last procedure will require 2 paper clips, and this is going to be a TPS reset. And how this works is anytime you remove the TPS sensor, you do want to do this reset. If the TPS sensor is at 100%, but it's only reading 90, and the ECU thinks it's at 90, the ECU is going to send fuel and ignition and any other parameters for that 90% instead of 100. So this reset will allow it to relearn the voltage once you click over to full throttle again. It's going to be your red DLC connector here. You lift up on this tab, pulls right off. Have our 2 paper clips. Paper clip number 1 is going to go in the green and blue slot. Slide those in place. Paper clip number 2, let's swing down and take off the oil temp sensor connector. Paper clip number 2 in the connector. From here, the only thing you'll need to do is just turn the key switch to the on position. And after about 5 seconds, your check engine light should start flashing. Go ahead and disconnect that. It'll stop flashing for a second, and then it'll get a couple slow flashes after that for confirmation. So once that's all finished up, you're ready to go ride. Well guys, that wraps up the install video on this CRF110. If you have any questions about the setup, the throttle body, if you have any issues, concerns, anything like that at all, please let us know. Reach out, phone, email, Facebook Messenger, whatever's easy for you guys. If you'd like to see more videos, please leave a comment, drop a suggestion. We're looking to add more install videos, try and get some ride-alongs, things like that to give you more information. So we'll see you guys soon.